Hi, I'm Isabelle Carboni, and I'll be sharing with you the key findings from our 2021 Mobile Gender Gap Report. The Mobile Gender Gap Report series is an annual report that we've been publishing for the last 4 years, enabling us to comment on trends in the gender gap across low and middle income countries. The findings in this report were drawn from the GSMA Consumer Survey, supplemented by other third-party data and qualitative research that we conducted in India and Kenya, highlighting the impact of COVID-19 on mobile use by women. Despite the pandemic, we were able to complete the nationally representative survey in person in 8 low and middle income countries to gather critical data on the mobile gender gap and allow us to get an early indication of the potential impact of the pandemic on women's access to and use of mobile. In this presentation, I'll be sharing with you some of these key findings. One question that was top of mind for us this year was how the onset of the pandemic had influenced the mobile gender gap. 2020 was an unprecedented year, and the disproportionate negative impact of the pandemic on women has been well documented. For example, on their increased workloads and their loss of income opportunities. The good news is that so far at least, the pandemic does not seem to have had significant impact on the gender gap in mobile ownership, which has remained relatively unchanged, nor the gender gap in mobile internet use, which has seen positive change this year, driven mostly by South Asia. COVID-19 has highlighted just how important connectivity is for sharing information about the pandemic, maintaining relationships with friends and family, supporting livelihoods, and enabling remote access to services such as healthcare and education throughout the lockdowns. Yet there are two sides to this COVID story, and we don't yet know what the long-term impact will be. On the one hand, the pandemic restrictions are driving greater need for connectivity as life has moved increasingly online. From our qualitative research, we found that in India, the lockdowns and COVID restrictions provided additionally socially acceptable justifications for some women to go online, for example, for children's education. But on the other hand, there are early signs that in some countries, the pandemic may be negatively impacting women's handset ownership more than men's. For example, our qualitative research in Kenya revealed that the economic impact of COVID-19 has been severe, affecting the affordability of mobile and lowering the justification for some women to use the internet. It's crucial that we continue to monitor the impact as the pandemic evolves across the world. So where are we today? Across low and middle income countries, 58% of women are now using the mobile internet. But how does women's increased use compare to men? Last year, we reported that in low and middle income countries, women were 20% less likely to use the mobile internet than men. This year, the mobile gender gap has improved. It's reduced to 15%. South Asia in particular has seen significant improvement, with women continuing to use the mobile internet at a faster rate than men, due to changing market dynamics and price reduction, resulting in a regional gender gap that's reduced from 50% last year to 36% this year. South Asia has previously had the widest gender gaps, but it is now on a par with sub-Saharan Africa for the first time. But overall, the mobile internet gender gap remains high, with significant gaps in regional and national levels. And while we've seen reductions in South Asia, the mobile internet gender gap remains largely unchanged in the other regions, highlighting that there's still important work to be done. As I mentioned earlier, it remains to be seen what the long-term impact of the pandemic will be. If we want to close the gender gaps, we need to understand what is preventing women from owning a mobile phone, all the way through to using the mobile internet regularly and accessing its full potential. We use a simple framework to understand this mobile internet user journey. The gender gap tends to widen at each stage in this journey. So although the gender gap for mobile ownership is 7%, it's more than double that at 15% for mobile internet use. Starting with mobile ownership, handset affordability is a key barrier. But it's also important to look at what type of handset people own. Smartphones are a driver of greater mobile internet use. And when women own smartphones, they are almost as likely as men to use the mobile internet and use a similar range of services. For the first time since 2017, the gender gap in smartphone ownership has reduced, driven by South Asia. Yet women still typically own more basic handsets than men, and are still 15% less likely than men to own a smartphone, which mirrors the gender gap in mobile internet usage. Moving on to awareness of mobile internet, we see that the gender gap continues to reduce, and there's been significant progress since 2017, particularly in India, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and Nigeria. Despite this rising awareness amongst women, the mobile internet gap is still high, suggesting that there's other key barriers stopping women from using it. Our researchers found that once women are using a mobile phone and they're aware of the internet, the top barriers that prevent them from accessing the mobile internet are a lack of literacy and skills and affordability, primarily of internet-enabled handsets. These are the same barriers for men, but we also see that these barriers disproportionately impact women. Women tend to belong to the groups that are most likely to be unconnected, such as those who are unemployed or have low literacy levels, and are also often affected by social norms that make mobile ownership and use more difficult. On mobile internet use, we see that even when women do use the mobile internet, they tend to use a narrower range of services than men. Despite this, there have been some positive changes in women's use cases this year. Mobile owners are now using their phones in a wider variety of ways than they were in 2019. Across lower middle income countries, we saw particular growth in the weekly reported use of mobile internet for listening to music online, watching free videos, and video calling. For example, in Kenya, the proportion of women reporting listening to free music online grew from 6% to 16%. In Bangladesh, women reporting watching free videos online almost doubled, from 11 to 20%. And women's weekly use of video calling in India more than doubled, from 16 to 34%. In our qualitative research in India, we saw that women's uptake of smartphones and the mobile internet were influenced by the additional justifications that COVID-19 restrictions provided. These included the need to connect with family and friends via video calls, access their children's education online, and find new income-generating opportunities, as well as the increased pressure on devices in the home, especially during those lockdown periods. It remains to be seen if these behavior changes will stick post-COVID. Now, the mobile gender gap is driven by a complex set of social, economic, and cultural factors, which result in women experiencing barriers to mobile ownership and use more acutely than men. It's crucial that we address these issues. Closing the mobile gender gap presents social, commercial, and economic opportunities that will ensure that women are not further excluded from an increasingly digital society. If the mobile industry in low and middle income countries could close the gender gap in mobile ownership and use, this would represent a $140 billion commercial opportunity over a 5-year period. Over the same period, if we could close the gender gap in mobile internet, this would drive an additional $700 billion in GDP growth. Including women digitally will bring benefits to society at large, and it's critical to delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. Not just SDG 5 that relates to gender equality, but also goals on alleviating poverty, providing educational opportunity, and driving economic growth. So here's 5 points that we'd like to leave with you today. Mobiles are a critical tool for women, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has not negatively impacted the mobile gender gap overall, at least for now, but we need to keep tracking this data to ensure women's digital inclusion. The mobile internet gender gap has reduced, but primarily driven by South Asia, and it remains substantial. with little improvement in the other regions. Owning an internet-enabled handset helps women to access the full benefits of mobile connectivity. Improving affordability, particularly handset affordability, and literacy and skills are critical to closing the mobile gender gap. So, what can stakeholders do to address the mobile gender gap? Our full report provides more specific recommendations for different stakeholders, but here are 4 high-level actions to consider. Ensure that there's a focus on gender equality and reaching women at an organizational and policy level through senior leaders championing the issues and setting specific gender equity targets. We believe it's crucial for stakeholders to understand the mobile gender gap. This can be done by improving the quality and availability of gender disaggregated data, and by understanding women's needs and the barriers that prevent them from owning and using mobile technology. Unfortunately, this data is currently lacking. Gender disaggregated data is crucial for measuring the gender gap and is critical for setting targets, developing strategies, policies, and the commercial approaches to address the mobile gender gap and to keep tracking our progress. When it comes to the designing and implementing mobile-related products, services, and policies, stakeholders should ensure that ensuring women's needs, circumstances, and challenges are explicitly addressed. This includes addressing the key barriers faced by women, as well as a consideration of the social norms that can contribute to women experiencing those barriers more acutely than men. For example, when it comes to the top 2 barriers I mentioned earlier, affordability can be improved by supporting industry to lower the upfront cost of mobile handsets, particularly internet-enabled handsets, which would disproportionately benefit women. And on literacy and skills, invest in education and mobile skills training specifically for women and girls that increases their digital literacy and their confidence levels. If stakeholders don't proactively take women's needs and the barriers they face into consideration, they may inadvertently reinforce the mobile gender gap. Finally, collaborate and partner with different stakeholders to address the mobile gender gap. Targeted intervention is needed from industry, policymakers, the development community, and other stakeholders to ensure that women are no longer left behind. COVID-19 has shown us the importance of tracking digital inclusion. Now, more than ever, it is critical that we continue to monitor the impact of the pandemic on the gender gap and to use this data to ensure the digital inclusion of women for a better future. Thank you.